Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I hope you've enjoyed these several weeks of hearing from my students here at Biola University. I chose the most outstanding projects to share with you, and I hope that you enjoyed learning from and with them. Today we're resuming our study of the book of Exodus, picking it up where we left off in Exodus 15 verses 22 through 27, so the rest of chapter 15. And as is my usual practice, I'm going to begin by reading my translation from the Hebrew of these verses, and then I'll talk about some of the things that are going on, many of which are difficult to see in English. So starting in verse 22, Then Moses led Israel on a journey from the Sea of Reeds, and they went out to the desert of Shur. They walked 3 days in the desert, but they did not find water. They came to Marah, but they were unable to drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter. That is why its name was called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What can we drink?" So he cried out to Yahweh, and Yahweh taught him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and they became sweet. There he set for him a statute and a decision, and there he tested him. He said, "If you truly listen to the voice of Yahweh your God, and do what is right in his eyes, and listen to his commands, and keep all his statutes, all the diseases that I put on the Egyptians I will not put on you, for I am Yahweh your healer." Then they came to Elim, which means great trees, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. So they camped there alongside the waters. Now, what we notice right away in this little episode of Israel's travels through the wilderness is that it's not a straight journey. The path to Mount Sinai is not simple and is not straightforward. There's back and forth involved. They're going to come to this spot more than one time. The desert of Shur, the word Shur in Hebrew means wall, and it might refer to the fortifications of the Egyptians that line the desert. So they're now moving east into the Sinai Peninsula. And this desert is also known as the desert of Etham in Numbers 33 verse 9, where you can follow the full itinerary. We get a selective itinerary in Exodus 15 through 18 that focuses on some key highlights. Very ironically, I am supposed to be arriving at Sinai today, but here I am in my office instead of being on a plane. Apparently, my journey to Mount Sinai is also not a straight shot, but is taking a circuitous route. So hopefully it will work out for me to visit there soon, and I'll be able to join you on location for some Torah Tuesday episodes. But in the meantime, we're learning about what God does in the wilderness with his people when they are wandering around, when he has them right where he wants them, learning to trust him for everything they need. That's what I'm learning to do this week. There is a bunch of Hebrew wordplay in this short passage that I read to you that binds the story into a unified whole. So first, there are the words name, there, set, here, and keep, which all sound very similar in Hebrew. They are Shem, Sham, Sam, Shema, and Shamar. So as you're reading through the story in Hebrew, these words keep coming up, and some of them multiple times. There's another cluster of words that echo each other, creating a pleasing sound play that is from the sea, waters, days, bitter, Marah, and Egypt, which all sound similar. Here we go. Miyam, Mayim, Yamim, Marim, Marah, and Mitzrayim. So lots of M's and R's in there. And then in the first set of words, we have lots of S's and A vowels. And then there's another little cluster that seem to connect with both of them. So the name Moses, Moshe, the word to, which is Shatem in this passage, which occurs twice. Moses occurs 3 times. And then 70 palms is Shebi'im Tamarim. So again, reusing those same consonants and recombining them. The result is almost like a Dr. Seuss kind of sound as you're reading this story in Hebrew. This is the first occurrence in Exodus of the word for grumbling. the word loon, actually the first occurrence in the Bible thus far. It's going to appear in rapid succession in chapters 16 and 17, and then again in Numbers 14, 16, and 17 as a descriptor of the people's attitude towards Yahweh in the wilderness. This term is used almost exclusively in the wilderness narratives. It only occurs twice outside of these passages. And Gary Smith translates it as hostile complaining. George Pixley refers to it as a rebellion. This is not just like, oh, I'm tired, but a kind of angsty, hostile complaining that's coming from God's people. This is not like the lament we see in the Psalms, but a more vicious kind of complaining. And Moses cries out to God in response to that complaining, and God answers him. He answers him in a surprising way. They've encountered bitter water, and God makes the water sweet for them by showing Moses a tree. Now, the word tree in Hebrew is eitz, and it sounds very similar to the word for counsel or wisdom, eitzah. So it's possible that there's a wordplay here that Moses is needing to listen to the counsel of Yahweh, and that's why the tree is the symbol of choice. But it's also interesting how Moses discovers it. The text tells us that Yahweh taught it to Moses. He taught him the tree. The word taught comes from the same root word yara as the word Torah. So this is like a micro story in which God gives Moses the Torah and wants him to gain wisdom from it. So in case that feels like I'm overreading the text, making too much out of wordplay, this is a very interesting moment, like again, a micro scene that highlights the importance of listening to God's instruction and responding, which sets us up for the macro scene at Mount Sinai, where God's going to give more Torah and everyone will need to respond. Now, many of the ancient versions, Greek and other languages, have the word showed instead of taught, which makes sense why they would have transitioned to showed, because it sounds easier to understand. God showed him a tree, not God taught him a tree. But probably the more difficult reading is the one that is correct. They're very, very close in Hebrew. The vocalization is just slightly different, but probably that it's correct to see that Yahweh is teaching him because we want this echo of the Torah. This is not the first statute that we have in the Bible. Genesis 47, verse 26, Joseph makes a statute to levy the people and collect taxes. And then Exodus 5:14, we hear about a brick quota that is a statute. So in contrast to both of those, taxes and forced labor, Yahweh's statutes are fundamentally different. Here, Yahweh's statute is, here, follow my voice, and I will heal you, and I will heal your water, and I will provide for your needs. So it's really beautiful. Now, the big question that I want to close with is, who is being tested in this story? Most translations assume that Israel is being tested, but interestingly, it is singular. The pronouns are singular. There he set for him a statute and a decision, or a binding statute, if these two words are a hendiades that belong together, which is what Hauptmann argues. There he set for him a statute and a decision, and there he tested him. So it's very vague, but it seems from context that this is Yahweh testing Moses. Now, it's possible for Israel to be referred to in the singular with a collective singular, that Yahweh is testing the Israelites, but the Israelites aren't taking action here. Only Moses is taking action by throwing the tree into the water. And in this passage that I just read to you, Israel is consistently referred to using plural pronouns. So we see it in verses 22 through 24 and 27, Israel is plural. So it seems to me that the narrator is focusing in singularly here on Moses. And in that case, we end up with Yahweh tests Moses first. And then in the next chapter, chapter 16, he will test Israel. And then in chapter 17, Israel will test Yahweh. So we have 3 tests in the wilderness, but the interaction between the parties is different each time. So what is the test? Will you obey Yahweh's instructions? Because if you do, it will lead to life and flourishing rather than the diseases of Egypt. God is testing Moses because he, as a leader of the people, needs to follow God's commands if he wants to lead the people to follow God's commands. So we have a little test, and then it's going to work out to be a much greater test when they get to Mount Sinai. I hope this has been helpful to you to begin to set up the wilderness narratives. These chapters are fascinating because they show us God revealing himself as protector and provider. He's retraining them in the liminal space of the wilderness. Limen is the Latin word for threshold. And as they come into the wilderness, they're in this transitional space, a transitional zone between where they've lived and who they were and who they are becoming. And it's in that place that God does some of his most important work to reshape us and to help us to learn to depend on him more fully. I hope you have a great week.